And okay, so good morning, everyone, on this February 24th, but it seems like a nice spring day outside. Um, and the Torah reading this week is Tetzaveh, found in the Eitz Chaim on page 503. Whatever edition of the Chumash you have, it is Exodus chapter 27, beginning with verse 20. 27 of Exodus, verse 20, Tetzaveh. And the blessing for Torah study, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, shechitzanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. So we continue with what we began with last week in Truma, continued presentation of how the Mishkan is to be designed. And here it focuses first on the olive oil and then mostly on the priestly vestments and how they are to be fashioned. So there is a decent amount of commentary below the line that adds some interesting midrash to understand to make the details that could be pretty dry more meaningful. So I wanted to focus a lot of attention today on the below the line, first on page 503. Just letting somebody else in, and as soon as they come in. Okay, so the portion is Tetzaveh, again, Eitz Chaim, one more person coming in. So the portion is Tetzaveh in the Eitz Chaim, page 503, whatever edition of Chumash you're using, Exodus 27, beginning with verse 20. So I want to look below the line on page 503. Just listen along if you don't have the Eitz Chaim yourself. This parsha continues the theme of furnishing the tabernacle as the place that will represent God's presence in the midst of the Israelite camp. It then describes the role and the investiture of Aaron and his sons as Kohanim, ministering priests in the tabernacle. This parsha is the only one in the last 4 books of the Torah in which Moses neither is named nor is speaking. So this is interesting, and it's going to tell us an interesting midrash about this in a moment. But if you think about it, from the beginning of Exodus to the end of the Torah, Moses is all over the Torah. And just either simply Vayidaber Adonai el Moshe lemor, God spoke to Moses saying. So, but here, it only is atah, the very first word, ve'atah, and you. So it's implied that God's speaking to Moses, but it's not Vayidaber Adonai el Moshe lemor, atah tetzaveh. It's just ve'atah tetzaveh, and you command. So it's a continuation of last week, in which just making it that it's part of the bigger whole that was last week's portion. But it is interesting that this portion itself does not have Moses's name appear. So why is that? Noting this literary curiosity, some commentators explain it as Moses is generously stepping aside to let the spotlight fall on Aaron and his priestly functions. So that's idea number one. Why is Moses's name not here? Oh, because we're focusing on Aaron and his sons and the priesthood. So Moses says, even though he's my brother, right? It's just to understand. Kohanim today are a subset of the tribe of Levi. Moses was a Levi. That means his brother was a Levi. They're from the tribe of Levi. But God institutes this new subdivision within the tribe of Levi, this new division of Kohen, right? So someone who is a Kohen today, you can't convert to Judaism to become a Kohen. When you convert to Judaism, you become a regular Israelite. But you're only a Kohen if your father was a Kohen. Okay, not if your mother was a Kohen. Your mother tells you that you're Jewish. Your father tells you what tribe you're from. And the only tribe we care about today is Levi. So based on your father, you're either a Kohen or a Levi or an Israelite. Okay, so Moses and Aaron had the same father, Amram, from the tribe of Levi. But God instituted that from Aaron on, their children their sons will begin this new subset of Kohen. Okay, and there have been DNA studies of Jewish Kohanim, and they found a marker in the DNA that goes back, I think, 3,000 years. I think, I'm almost sure. You can Google it, DNA marker Cohen, and there is something in the DNA marker of a Kohen that is different from a regular Jew. And there's something in that marker that would attest to the fact that there's something ancient in their DNA that goes way back. So that's pretty cool. But Google it, you'll see. I'm not making this up. I remember reading something about this before. So I'm looking at my screen, and Joe Kraut is a Kohen. And if you want to send in your DNA to ancestry.com or something like that, maybe they'll find this particular marker in your DNA that will be unusual. It's a historic marker there. Okay.
My kids once, because I told them we weren't Kohens.
Right.
And so they sent away my DNA, and it came back we weren't Kohens.
So we
don't know where we got the name.
Right. So sometimes it happens with the customs official, either in Philadelphia, Ellis Island, wherever it was, that whatever your family's name was might have been too difficult for the person to write down. Easier to say, oh, you're Jewish, we'll go with Cohen. Right. So some people get Cohen, Levy, some typical Jewish name like that, even though you're not a Kohen. And there is Michael Levy, and the congregation is not a Levy. He's not a Levi. So it does happen that the customs people just got so overwhelmed and it's just too difficult for them to spell these unusual sounding Russian or Polish names. Just easier to go with that. Okay, so that's one idea, to step aside, Moses step aside to let the attention fall on Aaron. But it goes on, others point out that the traditional date of Moses's death, which is the 7th of Adar, always falls during the week in which Tetzaveh is read, which is not the case this year. Okay, so Tetzaveh this year is the week. The 7th of Adar was last Friday. And so the Purim, the 14th of Adar, is this coming Friday. So it's just the nature of the Jewish calendar this year that Tetzaveh does not fall during the week of Moses's yahrzeit. How they determined that it was the 7th of Adar, I don't know, but the rabbis did figure that. And in fact, it is a traditional time, Moses's yahrzeit, for a Chevra Kadisha to meet and have its annual meeting. So our Chevra Kadisha did not do that this year. In fact, we did it last year, and that was the last time, the 7th of Adar, that really we've met in person, and people were kind of wary about coming to the synagogue to have that meeting last year, but we didn't bother having a meeting this year. So the Chevra Kadisha, the group of people that takes care of preparing the dead for funeral, the idea is to meet on Moses's yahrzeit, because God, the tradition was that God took care of Moses. So if God could take care of Moses, then people need to take care of other people. Was the 7th of Adar also Moses's birthday? I'm not sure, Jan, but you can Google that. I'm not sure. It's all it's all supposition on the part of the rabbis trying to figure out hints in the text to try to get to understand when particular events took place. So the Torah is not specific at all with the date. So it's the rabbis making it up based on their assumptions. Okay, so that if usually Tetzaveh is read during the week of Moses' yahrzeit. So others point out that the traditional date of Moses' death, the 7th of Adar, always falls during the week in which Tetzaveh is read. They see his absence from the Torah reading like his virtual absence from the Haggadah as part of an effort to ensure that no cult of Moses worship would ever arise. So this is kind of in memory of Moses. If it's with his birthday, if Moses's name was all over this parsha, then that's kind of revering Moses, and we don't do that. We don't know where he's buried, and so this is another hint at that. Keep Moses's name, and in memory of his yahrzeit, we don't mention his name. So just interesting ideas about why Moses's name does not appear in this week's parsha. Then I wanted to go on. So the beginning of the portion begins. Ve'ata tetzaveh et bnei Yisrael. You command the people of Israel, or instruct, as it says here. V'ikhu elecha, and take for yourselves shemen zayit zach katit lama'ur. Bring clear oil of beaten olives. Shemen zayit is olive oil. Zach would be clear, and katit is beaten. So I'm not sure what kind of olive oil that is, and that so I'm just right. So that the above the line, the text specifies oil extracted from olives because oil used in the tabernacle had to be clear or so refined as to be free of dregs. This distinguished it from oil made from other sources, including sesame seed, flax, and animal fats, which were used in the ancient Near East. So olive oil was a clearer kind of oil, and so bring you clear oil of beaten olives, lama'ur for lighting, leha'alot ner tamid for kindling lamps regularly. So laha'alot, they're translating here as kindling. Usually it means to bring up, to raise up, like aliyah, la'alot, to go up to the Torah, laha'alot ner tamid. So it says here that it's kindling as opposed to bringing up for the eternal light. So this is a command to use pure olive oil for the ner tamid. So we have the command for the ner tamid right here in the first verse, where it's supposed to be set up is verse 21. Aaron and his sons shall set them up in the tent of meeting outside the curtain which is over the ark of the pact, to burn from evening to morning before the Lord. It shall be a dew from the Israelites for all time throughout the ages. So set it up in the tent of meeting outside the curtain over the ark, which is why the ner tamid in synagogues today is found above the ark in every synagogue. So when every synagogue has a ner tamid, but is not lit in the way that the Torah describes it here. In other words, nobody comes every morning to relight the ner tamid. So there are some synagogues that do have, those Shiva candles, God forbid you get from the funeral home, the tall candle that lasts for 7 days. There are some synagogues that use that as their ner tamid. So they have it special, like a special holder for it above the ark. And instead of using electricity like we do, or gas, there are some synagogues that have a gas light that as their ner tamid. Some do use a real candle. And if it's a real candle, they use that Shiva candle, and that has to be then replaced every week. So we have We have an electric one in our synagogue that is on a separate circuit than all the other circuits of the synagogue. So it's supposed to keep on going. If the power goes out, that circuit doesn't go out. And that is true. We've had power outages in the synagogue, and we've been in the building now. This summer will be 10 years. Poo, poo, poo. I don't want to jinx it. And I've said this many times, that we have not had to replace the light bulb in either one of our Ner Tamid, in the one in the chapel or the one in the sanctuary. We haven't had to replace it yet. So Moses is not in the Haggadah. Moses' name does not appear in the Haggadah. That's the whole idea behind the Haggadah, that the focus of the Haggadah is on God, not on Moses. And that's what we're supposed to focus on. The Haggadah is all about how God enabled Moses and the people of Israel to get out of Egypt. Okay, so the Ner Tamid. So now there's more below the line about this Ner Tamid and the menorah. The first section of the Parsha deals with the lighting of the menorah. This tradition is reflected in today's early light, today's eternal light, the only commanded practice associated with the ancient tabernacle that is still with us, right? So there are other hints at the design of these vestments that is still with us today. So that the covers for the Torah, the belt that keeps the Torah nice and fit, the bells, the crowns that are on the Torah and the bells on them as well. They're also reminders of the vestments of the Kohanim, but they're not exactly how the Kohanim dressed. They are reminders, but not exactly. And Ner Tamid is a more direct reminder of what was lit in the Mishkan and later in the temple in Jerusalem. So, there are all different kinds of artistic renditions of Ner Tamid. You go into any synagogue, you won't find the same Ner Tamid in every synagogue around the world. It is quite fascinating. I understand. I think that the Spanish Portuguese synagogue in Amsterdam, I haven't been there, but I've heard that they use real candles there. So every day they put a new candle in for their Ner Tamid. So every synagogue is different in how they do the Ner Tamid, but it's always above the ark, just like it's described right here. So that is a more direct association with the Mishkan. Why has light been such a favorite symbol of God? Right? So the Ner Tamid is supposed to remind us of God's eternal, constant presence with us. Perhaps because light itself cannot be seen. We become aware of its presence when it enables us to see other things. Light can't be seen. So that's interesting that light can't be seen. I'm looking out the window. I'm at the shul today. I'm looking out the window in my office. Can you see light? Well, we know the source of the light is the sun, but if it's a cloudy day, it's still light outside. So then you can't really see the light. So I guess that's what the commentary is suggesting. Some sources of light you can see, but other light you might not be able to see. We become aware of its presence when it enables us to see other things. Similarly, we cannot see God, but we become aware of God's presence when we see the beauty of the world, when we experience love and the goodness of our fellow human beings. All right, that's an interesting idea. One idea is why God is symbolized by light. Similarly, fire has been used to symbolize God's presence. Like light, fire is not an object. It's the process of liberating the energy hidden in a log of wood or a lump of coal, even as God becomes real in our lives in the process of liberating the potential energy in each of us to be good, generous, and self-controlled. So I'm not a scientist, but that seems to make sense that fire, I mean, if you have the right conditions, wood will be engulfed in flame, whether it's lightning from the sky hitting a tree and causing a forest fire, or just a cigarette being thrown into a dry forest, it releases energy there. And so the initial fuel serves as a catalyst to receive for the energy to be released from the tree, from the firewood, whatever it is, or from the charcoal for your charcoal grill. So you just need the catalyst. So the fire is the catalyst. It's not a thing in and of itself. Even though we say a prayer over it every Friday night for the Shabbos candles, Hanukkah every night, every holiday when we light holiday candles, and Saturday night for the Havdalah candles. So there it seems as if, all right, so, but then for the holiday aspect of it, or the Shabbos part of it, the lighting the candle symbolizes the entrance of the beginning of Shabbos or the holiday. And then lighting the Havdalah candle symbolizes the first work that we're doing as Shabbat ends. But are we blessing so on Saturday night, we're saying an actual blessing for Borei Me'orei Ha'esh, who creates the lights plural of the fire, which is why you need at least a candle that has at least 2 wicks in it, because of the plural form of the blessing. But so you are saying a blessing over that light, which implies that it exists on itself. But for this commentary, the idea that the fire is there only as long as there still is fuel. Once the fuel is used up, there's no more fire. So fire can't exist on its own. It needs something else. And so God becomes real in our lives in the process of liberating the potential energy in each of us to be good, generous, and self-controlled. So this idea that we have to use the fuel that is in us in order to be the spiritual religious people that we can be. And it concludes, if light is a symbol of God, then fire, the product of human technology, represents human efforts to bring the reality of God into our world. So that's taking a human creation, fire, and making it into something sacred and spiritual. So it's just, I wanted to share this interesting spiritual idea about this. So there's also commentary about olive oil, why olive oil is used and not sesame oil or some other form of oil, which, by the way, all can be used for lighting Shabbos candles or holiday candles. There's a whole chapter in the tractate Shabbat. What can be used? Bameh madlikin. With what can we use to kindle a flame for which we can say a bracha for Shabbat or a holiday. So it lists then a whole variety of fuels that can be used and what can't be used. So anything that stinks, like, you can use manure as a fuel, right? And there are places around the world that use different forms of dried manure as fuel. You can't use that for a Shabbos candle because of the disgusting smell that emits from it. So one idea behind using of fuel for a Shabbos candle is that there has to be a pleasant odor to it. So burning olive oil has a pleasant odor to it. It burns cleanly, but there are other oils that do burn cleanly as well. So there's commentary here: clear oil of beaten olives. That which fuels the menorah must be pure, uncontaminated by jealousy, selfishness, pride, or greed. So that's the idea behind the clear, that it's a metaphor for our own personality, what we're supposed to bring to in our encounter with God, that we should be uncontaminated by jealousy, selfishness, pride, or greed. Why olive oil? In antiquity, as today, the olive branch was a sign of peace. You can also say it's a sign of hope, right? Because at the on the ark, Noah sent out the dove, and the dove brought back an olive branch. So the dove bringing back the olive branch serves as a symbol, an eternal symbol of peace. Olive trees mature slowly, so only when there was an extended time of peace with agriculture left undisturbed could the olive tree produce its fruit. Right, so it's not an easy harvestable product. You need time, you need peace in the land in order to be able to harvest olives, right? And there's a whole debate today within the Israeli-Palestinian conflict today about protests when the IDF supposedly bulldozes olive orchards of Palestinians, and peace activists try to get in the way of the bulldozers for the olive tree. So in the modern Israeli-Palestinian conflict, the olive tree is not just a symbol, but it is a product of this conflict. But the idea that it takes a long time to be able to harvest the olive is an interesting concept as well, related to peace. And then it goes on, even as the oil of the olive does not mix with other liquids with which it comes in contact, so has the people Israel kept its own identity when it has come in contact with other nations. Now you can say that about any oil, but that it doesn't mix with any other liquid, but that's an interesting idea too, about the olive oil representing Jewish identity, and that we have kept apart from everybody else and maintain our unique identity when in contact with other people. Okay. So now chapter 28 begins the lengthy description of all the vestments for the Kohanim and setting them aside as separate from the community. So it says at the beginning of the chapter, "V'ata hakrevi lecha," and you, again. So it's interesting. So not just in verse 20, "V'ata," at the start of chapter 28, God talks to Moses, "Hey, you," essentially, instead of a more endearing or formal Moses, just says, "And you." So continuing this. Not mentioning Moses by name. "And you bring forward to you Aaron your brother and his sons with him from among the people of Israel, lechahanoli, to make him into a priest, or to make me as a priest, to serve me as a priest," it says in the English. Aharon, so specifically Aharon, Nadav and Avihu, Eleazar and Itamar, the sons of Aaron. And so now set them aside, and now begin making their special clothing. The Asita Bigdei Kodesh. You should make holy garments for Aaron your brother, Lechavod Ulatif Aret. It's translated as for dignity and for adornment. But kavod and tifaret can also be translated as honor and glory. Okay, so it's for these beautiful, lofty purposes. So now below the line on page 504, on verse 1, there's this comment here about the whole the whole idea of the priesthood. Although some people, it says, may be bothered by the idea of a hereditary priestly class, which could easily include the unworthy children of a Kohen and exclude those who would want to serve, it did have advantages. So in other words, that's the argument that some people have today about maintaining the Kohen and Levi special honors in synagogue. right? So why is it some egalitarian congregations say that we should still maintain a Kohen Aliyah and a Levi Aliyah? And why should we have, and there are far fewer conservative synagogues that still do Duchanin. Why should we do Duchanin today and highlight the Kohanim on the Bima like that, and still maintain a job for the Leviim to help the Kohanim wash their hands in preparation for Duchanin? Why should we do that? If we are fully egalitarian, everybody should be able to access equally. And since there's no temple in Jerusalem, this is an archaic practice. Now, I do remember, so I've been here 26 years, so maybe it was 24 years ago that we brought up to the religious committee, I brought up to the religious committee the idea that maybe we should forego Kohen and Levi, that if we're becoming egalitarian, which we were at that point, fully egalitarian, maybe we should be completely not just gender egalitarian, but completely egalitarian. Do away with Kohen and Levi. Boy, was there an uproar in the congregation about that. And I remember the town hall meeting that we had, and I'm looking at Sylvia fondly because Marv was, they were there. I do remember them there, and Marv being an active participant in that town hall meeting, along with a few other Kohanim and Leviim, among others who are not Kohanim and Leviim, who are actively involved in that town hall meeting. I mean, there must have been a good 50 people there at that meeting, from what I remember, in the sanctuary on Lockwood Drive. So I was convinced not to do away with Kohen and Levi, but to agree to allow Kohen and Levi to be gender egalitarian. So in other words, a daughter of a Levi and a daughter of a Kohen could be called up for those aliyot as well. So, which is why we call Barbara up for the Levi Aliyah, right? And Scylla Grossberg for a Kohen Aliyah, and Kathy Plotkin for a Kohen Aliyah, et cetera, and allow for women Kohanim, daughters of a Kohen, to Duchen as well. So Fran Kensky is proudly on the Bima when we Duchen, and Betty Balin as well frequently has done that, and maybe once or twice Joe's daughter has been on the Bima a long time ago, right after her bat mitzvah. I think she might have done it with you. She might have done it once with you. I do remember. I'm almost sure she, at least once. Maybe it was only once, but yes. So anyway, so the and Marlene Sandberg is a Levi. So so we have the Kohanim and Leviim, the women, actively involved in this, and that was the compromise that we would make. And there was precedent and a paper from the Teshuvah from the Conservative Movement Law Committee allowing this, because women Kohanim and women Leviim did have a special status that was still imparted to them, even though they couldn't pass on Kohen and Levi to their child, because only the father passes down Kohen and Levi. They still have their own special status. They could eat the special food called truma, even if they're married to an Israelite. The daughter of a Kohen could still eat that special food. So, and a daughter of a Kohen could be part of the Pidyon Haben, the redemption of the firstborn ceremony. You don't need a male Kohen to do that. You could have a female Kohen do that. So since the sources, the Talmud, the Mishnah and the Talmud talk about that and allow for women Kohanim to still maintain their status in some way, that serves as precedent for women Kohanim and Leviim today to receive that Aliyah and to even be part of Duchanim as well. So so again, back to this commentary. Although some people may be bothered by the idea of a hereditary priestly class, which could easily, so it can include the unworthy children of a Kohen and exclude those who would want to serve, it did have advantages. So that's the other thing. So some people could argue, who might argue against Duchanin, who are those Kohanim on the Bima? Are they really worthy of blessing us? So I always say to people, that's not the idea. It's their mitzvah to do it. We are an inclusive congregation. We don't ask questions about people. And Jonathan Cohen who's a Kohen, was hearing me do this, and he gave the Kohen symbol to me through the window in the door, right? So Leonard Nimoy on Star Trek, a good Jew knew this as the symbol. It's not the Vulcan symbol, but it's the Kohen. It's the letter Shin, right? If you use your imagination, if I can tilt my hand the right way and have it on a screen here, you have the three prongs of the letter Shin. When you do your hand, there's Gabe, a good Kohen like himself, doing that. Most people, I'm not a Kohen, and you can still do this with your fingers, but that's the idea. So you make your hand into this symbol. You have both hands like this under the talit, and the talit is over the Kohen's head as they are blessing the congregation with the priestly blessing, which would happen every day in the temple in Jerusalem. It happens every day in traditional synagogues in Jerusalem today. Every single day at morning minyan, Kohanim, they would do duchanin in a traditional synagogue in the repetition of the Amidah. In the rest of Israel, it's every Shabbat there would be duchanin, every single Shabbat in Israel. But outside of Israel, duchanin only happens on the holidays. And our custom is only on holidays when it's not on Shabbat. So anyway, so the letter Shin, because the letter Shin, it's on the tefillin, it's on the mezuzah. Letter Shin for Shaddai, one of the oldest names of God. So by forming their hands into the Shin under the talit, they are kind of harnessing God's energy as they are blessing the community. So the question could be for those of an egalitarian bent who want to do away with hierarchy, so make the congregation totally egalitarian and non-hierarchical, any congregation, not just ours. The argument would be, well, who are they to be up on the bima? Aren't there more worthy people in the congregation who could bless the congregation? So the argument against that is everybody is worthy of a blessing, of receiving a blessing and giving a blessing. As long as you're Jewish and of age, you're able to do. I don't ask questions of people as to whether they are worthy of blessing. Any Kohen that wants to duchen, by all means duchen, it's their mitzvah to do it. At regular Israelite, that's one of the 613 commandments, to bless the congregation if you're a Kohen. So a regular Israelite can't do that mitzvah. It's one of the 613 that a regular Israelite can't do. So for a Kohen, do the mitzvah, and there's a special bracha that they say, right? Asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav, asher kitshanu b'kedushato shel Aharon, right? Who has sanctified us with the sanctity of Aaron, right? So it's a different formula for the blessing itself. So just to maintain that history and that connection to Aaron the priest. So I think it's worthwhile to do. And the question of who's there on the bima as a Kohen to do this, I think that's not the right question to ask. That it's better. It's their mitzvah to do, and we shouldn't question that. So the continuing in the commentary, it kept the priesthood free of ambitious outsiders who would seek it for personal advantage, and it permitted children to be trained for a life of service and responsibility from birth. So having this Kohen status that went from father to son created this lifetime of service and a service corps for the Mishkan and later for the temple in Jerusalem. And it kept other people away who might argue, I'm worthy of being a Kohen and I'm going to make myself a Kohen. So by saying that it's only hereditary, nobody else can come into the priesthood, you have to be born into it. It keeps it away from being able to be corrupted by other people. Now, what comes to mind is that in the age of the Roman Empire, before the temple was destroyed, the Romans did appoint the high priest. And I'm not sure, though, if they appointed the high priest from among non-priests, or they appointed the high priest from a different priestly family than had been there before. It's most possible that there are many priestly families who were in charge of different things. There was one priestly family that was in charge of making the incense, and they maintained the special recipe for making the incense. So that was, I think that was the Baitus family that made the incense. And there are different Kohen families that were in charge of different things. There could have been one that was in charge of repairing the vestments or making replacement vestments for the Kohanim, et cetera, et cetera. So it's possible the Roman Empire, the Roman general or governor of Palestine in the 1st century CE appointed a Kohen who would be sympathetic to the Roman Empire. There are stories in the Mishnah and the Talmud about how that appointed high priest, I think it was Caiaphas was his name, that he was pelted with etrogim one Sukkot because he was not accepted as the high priest by the Israelite community themselves. He was just a puppet of the Roman Empire. So the commentary goes on. The sages taught that though the crown of priesthood is limited to the descendants of Aaron and the crown of royalty to the descendants of David, the crown of learning is available to anyone who would earn it, right? So not every Jew can become the king of Israel, right? We have to be descended from King David. Not every Jew can be a Kohen unless you're born into the priesthood, but everyone can achieve the crown of learning. So for the rabbis, so there could be some Jews who could feel jealous, envious that they can never be. It wasn't a classic joke about somebody comes to a rabbi, please make me a Kohen. I'll give you $10,000 if you make me a Kohen. The rabbi said, I can't do it. Can't accept it. I'll give you $100,000 if you make me a Kohen. Why do you want to be a Kohen? Well, my father was a Kohen. My grandfather was a Kohen. So I might be telling it a little bit wrong, but that's the idea that you're born into it. You don't have to pay money to become part of it, and you can't pay money to become a Kohen unless you are a Kohen or unless a Levi by birth. But creating this new crown, a crown of learning, that's what the rabbis wanted to do. So I have to end a little bit early today at 1:15 because of a funeral that I have to get ready for down at Mount Lebanon. So we'll stop here for today. I want to wish everyone a happy Purim. So of course, tomorrow night and Friday is Purim. We have service on Zoom 7:30 Thursday night and 8 o'clock Friday morning for Megillah reading. Looking forward to the religious school students participating Thursday night, and wish everybody safe and stay safe and healthy, and take advantage of the good weather today. So long, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Happy Purim, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Rabbi, are you still there?
Yes, I'm here. Yes, I'm
Right.
reading Joe's comment. Yes.
When we
yes,
were,
go
I
ahead.
was trying to send it through the chat, but I guess I don't know how to do it. But I do remember when the women were invited for duckening, that several men from our synagogue services walked out.
Yes, no, that's true.
And we also lost a member because of that.
Yes, one member
Right.
because of that. That's right. Who wasn't? I don't think he was a Kohen, but yes, that's true. Yeah, all this. You imagine these conversations we had 25 years ago. Really, you think about it now. Really, we argued about that back then. It's taken for granted already. But this is what our policy is. But yes, when you make change to
Yes.
tradition, for some, it's hard to accept.
Bye.
Yeah, so Joe, you can trace it back to your grandfather's grandfather back in 1840. That's pretty cool. But I'm sure you can trace it back a lot longer than that too. Yeah. All right. Have a good day, everybody.
Bye.
Hi.